Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku wielded the Infinity Core? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The salt was a persistent thief. It stole the moisture from the air and left a crust on his skin. It crept into his lungs with every ragged breath, a coarse reminder of where he was. It worked with the rust, corroding the metallic mountains around him, painting them in leprous shades of orange and brown. To Izuku Midoriya, the taste of salt was the taste of failure. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was less a park and more a monument to societal neglect. For decades, the currents had conspired to drag the city's forgotten refuse to this shoreline, creating a landfill that bled into the sea. It was a junkyard with a tide. Refrigerators with their doors ripped off lay half-buried like beached whales, their innards spilling out in a tangle of wires and yellowed insulation. Cars, compressed into monstrous metal cubes by some long-forgotten villain attack, sat in silent, geometric defiance of their original purpose. Everywhere, there was the glint of broken glass, the snag of ripped plastic, and the pervasive, cloying stench of decay and briny water. For Izuku, it was a sanctuary. A crucible. A punishment. His muscles screamed. Every fiber in his arms and back was a taut wire of agony, vibrating with exhaustion. He had been at this for 6 hours, fueled by 2 protein bars and a bottomless well of self-loathing. His hands, covered in thick work gloves that were already showing signs of wear, gripped the rusted frame of a washing machine. His sneakers, the familiar red ones that had seen him through so much, found little purchase on a shifting pile of old tires. Just a little more, he grunted, his voice a raw whisper lost to the hiss of the receding waves. He wasn't trying to clean the whole beach. He wasn't that naive. His goal, his self-imposed penance, was a small 10 by 10 foot square. His American dream plan, as he had morbidly named his new training regimen, was an exercise in futility disguised as progress. He would clear one square. Then the next day, another. It was a physical manifestation of his desperation, a quirkless boy trying to move a mountain with his bare hands. He leaned his entire body weight into the task. The metal frame scraped against the collapsed filing cabinet, the sound like a shriek of pain. For a moment, it held, and Izuku's own frame trembled with the strain. His vision swam with black spots. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the surf. And in that moment of strain, the memory, pristine and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through him again. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic. The voice was not his own. It was deeper, imbued with an authority that had shaped the world. The voice of All Might. The memory was so vivid he could almost feel the wind whipping across that rooftop, the cold metal of the safety railing under his desperate grip. He had poured out his soul, the secret shame and the burning hope of his entire 14 years of life, to his idol. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? He could still see the puff of steam as All Might deflated, the symbol of hope collapsing into a skeletal man drowning in an oversized t-shirt. The sight had been shocking, but the words that followed were devastating. They were not cruel. They were worse. They were kind. They were practical. They were a death sentence delivered with a gentle hand. Without a quirk, it's just not possible. Pro heroes are always putting their lives on the line. Some villains just can't be beaten without power. So no, I honestly can't say that you can be a hero without a quirk. Izuku's arms gave out. He stumbled back, and the washing machine slid back down the pile of junk with a deafening clang. He fell, landing hard on his rear in the coarse, trash-littered sand. The impact jarred his teeth. He didn't have the energy to get up. He just sat there, chest heaving, staring at the monument of his own inadequacy. All Might had tried to soften the blow. He'd suggested becoming a police officer, a doctor. Good, noble professions. But it was like telling a bird born without wings that it could be an excellent worm. It wasn't the point. The point was the feeling. The feeling he got watching All Might pluck civilians from a collapsing bridge. The way his heart swelled when a hero, any hero, stood between the innocent and the monstrous. It was a calling, a fire in his soul that everyone, from his childhood friend to his own mother to the number one hero himself, had tried to extinguish with the cold water of reality. His mother's tearful, "I'm so sorry, Izuku," when he was 4, Kaken's explosive, sneering, "You're just a pebble on the side of the road, a worthless, quirkless Deku," and now All Might's final, logical, soul-crushing verdict. He had stood on that rooftop after All Might left, and for a terrifying, fleeting moment, he'd understood the impulse to just let go, to take that leap of faith, as Kaken had so cruelly suggested earlier that day. But he couldn't. Because even in his despair, a tiny, stubborn ember of heroism remained. Heroes didn't give up. So he had walked home, a ghost in his own skin, and found his answer not in a leap from a roof, but in a grainy online video. It was an old interview with All Might, from his early days in America. He talked about how his power required a strong vessel, how he trained his body relentlessly, and that was it. That was the only thing Izuku had. His body. His will. So he created the American Dream Plan. A brutal workout schedule. A strict diet. And this Sisyphean task of cleaning a beach that was destined to be buried again by the next high tide. He wasn't training to be a hero anymore. He was training to prove All Might wrong. To prove that a quirkless body, pushed to the absolute pinnacle of human potential, could still do something, even if that something was just moving garbage. It was a pathetic dream, but it was his. He pushed himself to his feet, his joints protesting. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the polluted sky in brilliant strokes of orange, pink, and violet. The light glinted off the endless sea of trash, making it look, for a moment, like a treasure trove. "Just one more," he muttered, grabbing a thick, grease-blackened chain that was half swallowed by the sand. He braced his feet and pulled. The chain resisted, and anchored to the planet's core. He pictured Endeavor melting it. He pictured Best Jeanist unraveling it into threads. He pictured Mount Lady growing to the size of a building and kicking it into the ocean. He pictured himself, quirkless, useless Deku, and pulled harder. His muscles burned with lactic acid. A low growl of effort escaped his lips. The chain moved. An inch. Then another. He was a human tug-of-war against the dead weight of the world. With a final, desperate heave, the chain came free from the sand with a wet, sucking sound, and he stumbled backward, landing on the sand once again, but this time with his prize in his lap. He lay there, panting, staring up at the darkening sky. The first stars were beginning to appear, shy pinpricks of light in the deepening twilight. The work hadn't filled the void in his chest. It hadn't silenced the voices. But it had made him too tired to listen to them. For now, that was enough. As he watched, the sky began to put on a show. A meteor shower. He'd read about it on a science blog. The Perseids. Streaks of white fire tore silently across the upper atmosphere, elegant and ephemeral. For a moment, Izuku forgot the ache in his body, the sting of the salt, the weight of his own existence. He was just a boy watching the stars fall. It was beautiful. Then, one of them broke the rules. It wasn't a silent, graceful streak. It was a flare, a pulse of brilliant emerald and violet that seemed to detach from the main shower. It didn't burn out. It grew brighter. Its trajectory was wrong, too steep, too slow. It wasn't falling. It was descending. It wasn't a rock burning up in the atmosphere. It felt deliberate. Izuku sat up, his weariness forgotten, replaced by the familiar, electric thrill of the unknown. His analyst's mind, the one that had filled 13 notebooks with hero data, kicked into overdrive. Asterisk trajectory indicates impact point, close. Very close. Not a natural meteor. The color spectrum is all wrong, too saturated. It's not shedding mass as it should be. Asterisk. The object, now the size of a fist, screamed past overhead. It wasn't a roar of friction, but a high-pitched, melodic hum, a sound that vibrated not in his ears but directly in his bones. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound he had ever heard. Crump! It impacted the beach about 200 yards away, deep within the junkyard's metallic labyrinth. The sound was strangely muted, more of a deep, resonant thud than an explosion. A plume of sand and steam erupted into the air, backlit by the dying sun. Silence. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves. Any sane person would have run. Any sane person would have pulled out their phone and called the police or the fire department. Izuku Midoriya was not sane. He was a boy whose curiosity was a force of nature, a compulsion stronger than fear, stronger even than his own instinct for self-preservation. This was an anomaly, an unknown, and his entire being was wired to observe, analyze, and understand. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not away, but towards the crash site. He clambered over a mountain of discarded electronics, his feet crunching on shattered television screens. He squeezed between two rust-eaten shipping containers, the metal cold against his thin jacket. The air grew warmer, and that strange, resonant hum grew louder, a bass note that seemed to make the world thrum. There was a smell, too, not burning, but something clean and sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. He reached the edge of a small clearing and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. In the center was a crater, perhaps 10 feet across. The sand within it hadn't been blasted away. It had been fused into a swirl of dark, greenish glass, smooth and polished as obsidian. At the very heart of the crater, half buried in the transformed sand, was the source of the hum. It was not a rock. It was a crystalline object, about the size of a human heart. It seemed both organic and artificial, a fusion of technology and biology that defied categorization. Its surface was a milky, semi-translucent white, but within it, faint, thread-like veins of multicolored light pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm. A soft, internal luminescence made it glow from within, casting strange, shifting shadows on the glassy crater. It looked alive, like a sleeping, cosmic creature, and on its surface, facing upwards, was a single, empty socket, a perfectly shaped indentation that seemed to be waiting for something. Izuku crept closer, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm that was jarringly out of sync with the object's calm, steady pulse. He felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of familiarity that made no sense. It felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. His gaze drifted from the pulsating heart-like object. There, lying just beside it in the crater, was something else. It was a piece of what looked like the same crystalline material, but it was a solid, deep, regal violet. It was a shard, perfectly cut and faceted like an impossible gemstone, catching the last rays of twilight and fracturing them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It radiated a quiet, immense pressure, a feeling of coiled, kinetic potential. It was the color of a king's robe, the color of a deep bruise, the color of a gathering storm. This was the source of the violet light he had seen in the sky. He knew, with an instinct that transcended logic, that the shard belonged in the socket. They were two parts of a whole. He slid down into the crater. The glassy sand was warm to the touch but not hot. The hum intensified, a physical pressure against his eardrums. He knelt, his knees pressing against the strange, smooth surface. He was inches away now. The pulsing light from the core illuminated his face, reflecting in his wide green eyes. It felt peaceful, welcoming. He reached out a trembling hand, his gloved fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the white, heart-like object. The reaction was instantaneous. The moment his fingers made contact, the core flared with a brilliant, silent flash of white light. The humming stopped. The rhythmic pulse stuttered. Then, with a speed that defied physics, it surged forward. It didn't break his skin. It didn't tear his clothes. It phased. He felt a strange, invasive coldness as it passed through his glove, through his hand, up his arm in a split second. It was a chilling, incorporeal sensation, like being touched by a ghost. It moved under his skin, a lump of cold light traveling up his limb, past his elbow, his shoulder, across his collarbone. He cried out, a choked gasp of shock and terror, stumbling backward. The object settled in the center of his chest, directly over his sternum. The coldness vanished, replaced by a deep, spreading warmth, like a hot drink on a winter's day. He frantically tore at the front of his shirt, pulling the fabric away. There was no wound. No blood. But there, glowing faintly beneath the skin of his chest, was the core. It had embedded itself within him, its soft, multicolored light pulsing in perfect sync with his own terrified heartbeat. It felt less like an implant, and more like a new organ he'd had his whole life. He stared down at the impossible sight, his mind screaming. What is this? A parasite? A symbiote? A quirk? No, that's impossible. I'm quirkless. The X-ray, the toe joint, asterisk. His panic-stricken gaze fell upon the violet shard, still lying in the crater. And with the core now a part of him, he felt a new sensation. A deep, gnawing incompleteness, an undeniable, overwhelming urge to pick up the shard and place it where it belonged. The socket on the core, now flush against his own sternum under the skin, was a phantom ache, an empty space that screamed to be filled. Fighting against every rational thought, he obeyed the instinct. He reached down, his hand shaking violently, and picked up the violet gem. It was warm, almost hot, and it thrummed with a low, powerful vibration that traveled up his arm. It felt like holding a miniature star. He brought the shard to his chest. As it neared the place where the core was embedded, a faint, glowing outline of the socket appeared on the surface of his skin. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm his racing heart, he pressed the shard against it. It clicked into place as if guided by magnets, sinking painlessly into his body and locking into the core within. For a single, terrifying second, there was absolute silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the power. It was not a feeling. It was a detonation. A universe of pure, unadulterated energy flooded every cell of his being. It was the force of a planet's rotation, the kinetic energy of a striking asteroid, the raw, untamed power of momentum itself. He saw violet light behind his eyelids. He felt a scream tear from his throat, but the sound was swallowed by a percussive roar that erupted from his own body. The glass in the crater beneath him cracked, splintering into a spiderweb of fractures. He was overwhelmed, drowning in a sea of force he couldn't comprehend. He scrambled backward, trying to get away from the epicenter of the blast, which was himself. His foot caught on a piece of rebar, and he fell, his head striking something hard. He cried out, not from the blow, but from the sheer sensory overload. His frantic movements had been a fatal mistake. Above him, his earlier efforts had left the precarious balance of the junkyard in a fragile state. The vibration from the core's activation was the final push. A towering, unstable pile of scrap metal, the very pile he had been struggling with earlier, groaned, shifted, and began to collapse. Directly on top of him, time seemed to slow. His analytical mind, even in its panic, registered the details. A dented, rust-colored refrigerator was at the forefront, tumbling end over end. Beside it, a car door, its window shattered, spun like a discus. Twisted pipes, engine blocks, and jagged sheets of metal followed in a deadly avalanche of industrial waste. There was no time to move, no space to run. This was it. After surviving a lifetime of scorn, after the crushing verdict from his idol, after finding something impossible and cosmic, he was going to die here, crushed by garbage. The sheer, pathetic irony of it was a final, bitter pill. He didn't think. There was no plan. There was only primal, mortal terror. He threw his hands up in a desperate, useless warding gesture, a child's defense against the nightmare. No! The word was a shriek of pure instinct. And the power, the raw, untamed ocean of it churning inside him, answered. It didn't come from his hands. It erupted from his entire being, channeled through his outstretched arms. A wave of incandescent, violent violet energy exploded outwards. It was not a blast of heat or light, but of pure, directional force. The air itself seemed to ripple and distort. The hum he'd heard from the meteor returned, magnified 1,000,000 times into a deafening, resonant boom that shook the entire beach. The wave of force struck the falling avalanche of scrap metal. It didn't just stop it. The refrigerator, the car door, the pipes, the engine blocks, every piece of metal, from the largest chassis to the smallest screw, was instantly halted in midair. For a microsecond, they hung there, suspended in a shimmering violet field. Then, the kinetic force of their fall was not just negated, it was seized, multiplied, and turned against them. With a sound like a giant's fist crushing a can, the entire mass of junk was violently and instantaneously compressed. Metal screamed as it was warped and twisted, folded in on itself like paper. The refrigerator was flattened into a plate, then crumpled into a ball. The car door was shredded and compacted. In less than a second, the entire falling pile, tons of jagged, deadly metal, was crushed into a single, dense, glowing hot sphere no larger than a beach ball. The sphere, trailing a comet's tail of violet energy, was blasted away from him. It rocketed through the air, a miniature meteorite forged from trash, and flew for hundreds of feet before crashing into the sea with a colossal splash, sending a plume of steam and water 50 feet into the air. Silence returned, heavier and more profound than before. The only sound was the fizzing of the superheated metal ball cooling in the ocean and the frantic, ragged sound of Izuku's own breathing. He lowered his arms, staring at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. His right arm, his dominant arm, felt like it had been shattered and then crudely put back together. A deep, searing pain radiated from his shoulder to his fingertips, a phantom agony that suggested his bones had been ground to powder. It was an agony that felt disturbingly similar to the descriptions he'd read of All Might's early, uncontrolled smashes. Exhaustion, absolute and total, slammed into him like a physical blow. The adrenaline vanished, leaving a black void in its place. His body felt hollowed out, every ounce of energy consumed by that one, reflexive act. He collapsed onto the cracked glass of the crater, his limbs refusing to obey him. His vision blurred, the world dissolving into a swirl of color and light. Beneath his skin, the core pulsed weakly, its light a dim flicker. The violet shard at its center had gone dark, dormant. His last conscious thought was a simple, bewildered question that echoed in the screaming void of his mind. What just happened to me? From the shadowed entryway to the beach, a skeletal figure watched, his form cloaked in the growing darkness. Tashinori Yagi had returned, a ghost haunting the scene of his own failure. Guilt was a physical thing, a shard of glass in his gut that twisted with every breath, far worse than the gnawing ache of his ruined stomach. He had seen the light in that boy's eyes. It was a light he recognized, the same manic, brilliant fire that had burned in his master, Nana Shimura. The unshakable, irrational conviction that one's life was worth nothing if it wasn't spent in the service of others. And he, All Might, the symbol of peace, had snuffed it out. His words had been logical. They had been responsible. They had also been a betrayal of everything One for All stood for. The quirk itself was a testament to the fact that power could be passed on, that the will to save was more important than the accident of birth. He had judged the boy on his quirklessness, not his heart, and the shame of that hypocrisy was a bitter acid in his throat. He had come back to find the boy. To what? To apologize? To offer him a place at a support agency? He didn't know. He just knew he couldn't let it end like that, with the boy's shattered dream left on a lonely rooftop. He had spotted him almost immediately, a tiny, determined figure moving amidst the mountains of trash. He had watched, hidden, as the boy strained and struggled, pitting his frail human body against the unyielding mass of the junkyard. It was pathetic. It was foolish, and it was the most heroic thing Tashinori had seen in years. The boy was already training, already pushing himself, already refusing to accept the world's verdict. Then the sky had lit up. He saw the strange, violet-green meteor break away, its descent too controlled, too purposeful. He tensed, his hero instincts flaring. Was this a villain's quirk? A weapon? He saw the boy run towards it. Problem child, Tashinori had thought, a flicker of exasperated affection cutting through his guilt. He had followed at a distance, his emaciated form allowing him to move with a stealth his muscle form could never afford. He arrived just in time to see the boy kneeling in the newly formed crater. He saw the pulsating core. He felt a strange resonance in his own bones, a thrum of ancient power that made the embers of One for All within him stir uneasily. This was not a quirk. It was older. It felt primal. He watched in stunned silence as the core merged with the boy's body. He saw him pick up the violet shard and press it into his own chest. He felt the explosion of energy, a wave of pressure so immense it made his teeth ache, even from 200 yards away. It was a power signature unlike any he had ever encountered. It dwarfed Endeavor's fire, it humbled his own strength. It felt like a fundamental constant of the universe had been unleashed on a public beach. And then he saw the junk pile fall. A cold dread seized him. He was too far away, too weak in this form. He couldn't possibly make it in time. He was about to watch the boy he had failed die because of his own inaction. But then the boy had thrown up his hands. Tashinori witnessed the impossible. The wave of violet force. The instantaneous compression of tons of metal into a small, searing sphere. The sheer, casual defiance of physics. It wasn't just strength. It was control. Control over force, over motion itself. He had seen all for one wield hundreds of quirks, but he had never seen anything like this. This was not a power you stole or collected. This was a power you were. He watched the glowing ball of trash arc over the beach and vanish into the sea. He watched the boy collapse, a puppet with its strings cut. For a long moment, Toshinori Yagi simply stood there, hidden in the shadows, his mind struggling to process what his eyes had just seen. The world he knew, a world of quirks and heroes and villains, had been irrevocably altered. The neat lines and classifications had been shattered. He had told the boy he couldn't be a hero without a quirk, and the universe, in its infinite and terrifying irony, had responded by giving that very boy a power that transcended the very concept of quirks. A power that looked, to his experienced eyes, like the power of a god. The guilt in his gut was still there. But now, it was mixed with something else. Something he hadn't truly felt in years. Wonder. And a fragile, terrifying, brilliant flicker of hope. He looked at the collapsed form of Izuku Midoriya, a boy who now wielded a star in his chest, and a new thought pushed its way through the wreckage of his certainty. Perhaps. Perhaps I wasn't just wrong. Perhaps I was a fool. Taking a deep, rattling breath, the skeletal symbol of peace stepped out of the shadows and began to walk towards the boy who had just rewritten the rules of reality. His journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. Of course. Here is a lengthy, detailed 7,000-word rendition of Chapter 2, The Quirk That Isn't a Quirk, picking up right where the last chapter left off. Hashtag Chapter 2, The Quirk That Isn't a Quirk. The first thing to return was sound. Not the violent, deafening boom that had shattered the air, but the gentle, rhythmic sigh of the waves. It was a soft metronome, pulling him back from the black, silent abyss. The second thing was sensation, the unyielding hardness of the fused glass crater beneath his back and a deep, full-body ache that felt as if every bone had been rattled loose. The third was a smell, ozone and salt, a strangely clean scent layered over the familiar decay of the beach. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. The world was a blurry mess of deep purple and charcoal gray. The sun had completely set, leaving the sky bruised with the last vestiges of twilight. He tried to sit up, but a fresh wave of agony, sharp and specific, flared in his right arm. He cried out, a weak, pathetic sound, and fell back. Easy there, son. Don't try to move too quickly. The voice was not his own. It was gravelly, thin, and shockingly familiar. Izuku's head snapped to the side, his vision slowly sharpening. A tall, impossibly gaunt figure stood at the edge of the crater, his skeletal frame silhouetted against the dim sky. The baggy clothes, the sunken eyes that seemed to hold an old, weary fire. It was the man from the rooftop. The true form of All Might. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of exhaustion. He was here. He'd seen. Oh God, he had seen. All Might? Izuku stammered, his voice cracking. He scrambled to sit up, ignoring the protest of his muscles. His mind raced, trying to formulate an explanation for the impossible. I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. I was just cleaning, and there was this light, and the thing, it went inside me, and I didn't mean to. I swear I'm quirkless. It was an accident. I didn't break any laws, I don't think, except maybe for property damage, but the junk was already junk, so maybe it's okay? I'm sorry. The frantic, breathless torrent of words spilled out of him, a verbal smokescreen born of pure terror. He was half convinced he was about to be arrested by his own idol for possession of some illegal support item or an unregistered, catastrophically dangerous quirk. Toshinori Yagi simply listened, his expression unreadable. He slowly made his way down into the crater, his footsteps silent on the glassy sand. He knelt beside Izuku, his knees cracking audibly. He wasn't looking at Izuku's face, but at his chest, where even through the fabric of his shirt, a faint, rhythmic glow could be seen, like a firefly trapped under a blanket. An accident, Toshinori repeated, his voice quiet but resonant. He finally met Izuku's wide, terrified eyes. The look in them wasn't anger or disappointment. It was something far more unnerving, sheer, unadulterated all. Young man, I have seen a villain turn a city block into quicksand. I have watched a hero redirect a hurricane. I have personally punched a man so hard it changed the weather. But I have never, in my entire life, seen anyone do what you just did. He gestured with a bony hand toward the dark, churning sea. You took several tons of scrap metal, compressed it into a sphere the size of a prize-winning pumpkin, and launched it half a mile into the ocean. Accident feels insufficient. Izuku stared at him, speechless. The memory hit him then, not as a dream but as a sharp, clear recollection. The falling avalanche. The desperate fear. The eruption of violet power. He looked at his right arm, which throbbed with a pain so deep it felt etched into his very marrow. It was real. All of it. He looked down at his chest, at the gentle glow. The core. The shard. I can't explain it, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes out of sheer confusion and terror. It's not a quirk. I have the extra toe joint. The doctor said. I believe you, Tashinori said, and the simple affirmation struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. A quirk is a biological function, an evolution of the human form. What I witnessed felt different, older, more fundamental. It was not the power of a person. It felt like the power of the universe itself, channeled through a boy who was in the wrong place at the right time. Tashinori reached out, not to touch him, but hovering a hand over Izuku's chest. He could feel the residual energy, a faint warmth, a hum that tickled his nerves. On that rooftop, I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. My words were practical, born from a lifetime of pain and loss. But they were wrong. I judged your potential based on what you lacked, not on who you are. He lowered his hand, his gaze intense, piercing. What you have now, this power. It is immense. It is dangerous. Untrained, it could level a city by accident. In the wrong hands, it could break the world. Leaving you alone with it would be the single most irresponsible act of my entire life. Izuku's heart hammered against the dormant core in his chest. This was it. The other shoe was dropping. He was going to be taken away, quarantined, studied like a lab rat. But then Tashinori's expression softened. The skeletal visage of the sick man was replaced by the faint, but unmistakable, glimmer of the symbol of peace. I made a mistake, young Midoriya, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I failed you. I cannot give you my quirk. It is a sacred torch, meant for another. But that does not mean I cannot help you. You have a heroic heart. I saw it as you moved this trash, and I saw it when you stood your ground. Now you have the power to back it up. A power that needs a guide. He took a deep, rattling breath. Let me be that guide. I cannot teach you how to use this core. But I can teach you how to be a hero. I can train your body to withstand the strain, and I can train your spirit to wield that power with wisdom and restraint. I can help you become the hero I told you that you could never be. The world fell away. The sound of the waves, the ache in his arm, the chill of the night air, it all vanished. All that existed was All Might's offer. It wasn't one for all. It wasn't the answer he had originally sought. It was something more. It was a choice. A partnership. It was his idol, the greatest hero the world had ever known, looking at him, quirkless, terrified, accident-prone Deku, and saying, I believe in you. The dam of a lifetime of pain, of longing, of desperate hope, finally broke. Hot tears streamed down Izuku's face, silent and thick. A choked, watery sob escaped his lips. He wasn't crying from sadness or fear anymore. It was relief, so profound and so absolute that it felt like its own form of agony. He nodded, unable to speak, the motion jerky and spastic. He wiped his face with his uninjured arm, smearing grime and tears across his cheek. Yes. He finally managed to rasp, his voice hoarse. Yes. Please. Tashinori's gaunt face broke into a small, genuine smile. It was a faint echo of his heroic grin, but it held more warmth than the full-wattage version ever could. He placed a firm, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. All right then, young Midoriya. he said, the weight of a new promise settling over them both. Your training starts tomorrow, and first on the agenda, we need a plausible cover story for your quirk manifestation. The next 10 months were a blur of agony and exhilaration. Izuku's life was completely restructured, revolving around a single, monolithic purpose. His American dream plan was no longer a monument to his despair. It was a blueprint for his survival. All Might, in his Tashinori Yagi persona, became his personal trainer, his mentor, his secret keeper, and, in a strange, unspoken way, the father figure he never really had. Their routine was brutal. Every morning before dawn, Izuku was back at Dagoba Beach. The cleanup was no longer a symbolic gesture. It was a core part of his physical conditioning. Your body is a vessel, my boy! Tashinori would bark, his voice surprisingly forceful for such a frail man. That power you wield, the core, it's like a nuclear reactor. If you try to run it in a container made of tin foil, it's going to melt. We need to rebuild you into a container made of steel, and so they did. Izuku ran miles in the soft sand, his lungs burning. He swam against the harsh currents of the bay until his limbs were numb. And he moved trash. He learned to use proper lifting techniques, to engage his core, to understand leverage and balance. He was still quirkless for these sessions. All Might forbade him from using the core for what he called the grunt work. This was about building a foundation of pure, human strength. Slowly, miraculously, his scrawny frame began to change. Lean, wiry muscle began to define his arms and back. His stamina skyrocketed. The 10 by 10 foot square he had once struggled with became an entire section of the beach. The afternoons were for the core. These sessions were different. More dangerous. More cerebral. Their first task was simply learning to activate the shard of momentum at will. For weeks, Izuku struggled. He would sit on the now cleared section of the beach, his eyes squeezed shut in concentration, trying to summon the power that had erupted from him in a moment of terror. It's not a switch, Izuku, Tashinori advised, using his first name now in their private sessions. It's not a muscle you flex. From what I saw, it responded to your will. Your intent. You weren't trying to activate a power, you were trying to survive. Izuku took that advice to heart. He stopped thinking about the core as a tool and started thinking about what he wanted to do. He would pick up a small pebble, hold it in his palm, and focus. He wouldn't think, turn on the power. He would think, move. For days, nothing happened. Then, one afternoon, as he stared at a pebble with fierce concentration, it vibrated. A faint violet aura, thin as smoke, enveloped it for a second. Then it shot out of his hand with the force of a pistol shot, skipping across the ocean's surface a dozen times before vanishing. Izuku stared, wide-eyed. I did it, indeed, Tashinori said, a proud smile on his face. Now do it again. And this time, try not to break the sound barrier. That was the beginning. Izuku's analytical mind, the one that had meticulously catalogued hundreds of quirks, was finally turned upon his own power. He started a new notebook for the future volume, 14. But this one was different. It wasn't about other heroes. It was about him. He quickly learned that the shard of momentum was far more than just super strength. It was the conceptual control of kinetic and potential energy. His first breakthrough beyond pushing things hard was the creation of what he called force pellets. By channeling a tiny, precise amount of energy into the space just in front of his fingertip, he could create a compressed marble of pure kinetic force and flick it. It was silent, invisible, and could knock a can off a pile of rubble from 50 yards away. It was a weapon of precision, not brute force. Next came defense. The memory of the violet wave that had saved him from the falling junk was his inspiration. He called them kinetic wards. All right, young Midoriya. Let's test the chassis. All Might, in his muscle form for a few precious minutes, stood 100 feet away, holding a discarded truck tire. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? 3? Izuku squeaked, planting his feet in the sand. Excellent! Let's aim for a 4. With that, All Might hurled the tire. It wasn't a full-power throw, that would have broken the sound barrier, but it flew with terrifying speed and force, a black donut of death. Izuku threw his hands up, just as he had before, but this time with intent. He pictured a wall. Not a brick wall, but a wall of pure opposition. A shimmering, hexagonal pattern plane of violet energy materialized in the air in front of him. The tires slammed into it with a deep, resonant thwump. The shield buckled, and Izuku felt the impact as a jarring shockwave that traveled up his arms, but it held. The tire fell harmlessly to the sand. It worked! Izuku cheered, before stumbling and clutching his aching arms. It did! All Might boomed, flashing a thumbs up. But the feedback is still immense. You're absorbing the full impact. A true master wouldn't just stop the force. They would redirect it. That became the next lesson. Izuku learned to angle his kinetic wards, to treat them less like walls and more like cosmic trampolines. An object thrown at him could be bounced off into the sky, or into another target. He learned to create a cocoon of kinetic energy around himself that could slow, but not stop, incoming attacks, a method that was less draining than a full stop. His greatest and most dangerous discovery was kinetic absorption. The theory was simple: if he could generate kinetic energy, could he also absorb it? Their test was simple. All Might, back in his gaunt form, tossed him a baseball. Instead of blocking it, Izuku tried to welcome its momentum into the core. The moment the ball touched his palm, he felt a jolt. The kinetic energy of the throw flooded into him, a warm, electric thrill that made the core in his chest pulse brightly. The baseball stopped dead in his hand, its momentum completely gone. He felt charged. Energized. Incredible. Tashinori breathed. I feel strong, Izuku said, looking at his hands. Like I could run a marathon. Be careful, my boy, Tashinori warned, his expression grim. If you can absorb energy, there's a limit. What happens when you try to absorb too much? Does it store it? Does it overload? This is the most dangerous technique you have. Use it only as a last resort. By the time the 10 months were up, Dagoba Beach was pristine. The sun now rose over a clean, beautiful shoreline, its light glinting on the calm water instead of broken glass. Izuku stood on that beach, staring at his handiwork. He was still lean, but his body was a corded map of hard-earned muscle. His face had lost its round, childish softness, replaced by the sharper angles of adolescence and determination. The UA application was submitted with a new quirk registered: energy manipulation. It was vague, but it was the best they could come up with. His mother had been a whirlwind of tearful joy and confusion at his late-blooming quirk, which they explained away as a one-in-a-million stress-induced manifestation. She didn't question it too deeply, just happy that her son's lifelong dream was no longer an impossibility. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, Tashinori met him near the gates, disguised in a trench coat and hat. You are ready, the hero said, his voice a low rumble. Your body is strong. Your control is fine-tuned. But remember the most important lesson: precision, not power, Izuku recited, his voice steady. Control, not chaos. Save, don't smash. Exactly. Tashinori nodded. Don't try to show off. Don't try to be me. Be you. A new kind of hero starts today. Now go. And make me proud. Izuku nodded, a fire of determination in his eyes. He turned and walked through the massive gates of UA High School, a boy with a secret star in his chest, ready to take his first real step into the world of heroes. The practical exam was controlled chaos. The moment present Mike screamed, "Gah!" The massive gates slid open and a tide of aspiring heroes flooded into the sprawling urban replica. Engines roared, explosions echoed, and the sounds of quirks clashing with metal filled the air. Izuku was swept along with the crowd, his heart pounding not with the fear of powerlessness, but with the immense pressure of the power he now held. For a moment, he was frozen by the sheer sensory overload. He saw a boy with engines in his calves, Ida Tenya, from a famous hero family, blast past him. He saw a boy with spiky blonde hair, Kaken, launch himself into the air with a series of explosions, a predatory grin on his face. OK. Focus. Analyze. Execute. He took a deep breath, the core in his chest thrumming with a low, steady energy. He didn't rush toward the center of the fray. Instead, he ducked into a side alley, his eyes scanning, processing, just as he had trained. A 1-point robot, a low-slung machine on treads, rounded the corner, its single red optic locking onto him. It charged, its metallic claws whirring. The old Izuku would have panicked and fled. The new Izuku stood his ground. He didn't rear back for a punch. He didn't even move his feet. He simply raised his left hand, index finger extended. Asterisk target, left tread axle. Output minimal, asterisk, a tiny, invisible ripple of force shot from his fingertip. The force pellet struck the robot's axle with a sharp tink. The axle seized, and the robot's left tread locked up. With its right tread still spinning, the machine lurched violently to the side and slammed into a wall, its optic flickering before going dark. 1 point. Minimal effort. No collateral damage. A small smile touched Izuku's lips. It works. He moved through the city with a quiet efficiency that was completely at odds with the explosive chaos around him. He wasn't a wrecking ball, he was a surgeon. He saw a group of 3 2-pointers cornering a girl with large earphone jacks hanging from her lobes. They were closing in, their multi-limbed frames scuttling like metallic spiders. Izuku didn't engage them directly. He spotted a weakened section of the fire escape on the building above them. Asterisk target, support bolts. Output moderate. Asterisk he flicked 3 force pellets in rapid succession. The rusted bolts snapped. A large section of the metal staircase clattered down, pinning 2 of the robots and crushing the third. The girl shot him a surprised, grateful look before plugging her jacks into her boots and sending a wave of sound at another target. Villain points 7, rescue points unknown, but hopefully some. From a rooftop high above, Katsuki Bakugo paused to catch his breath, his palms smoking. He was racking up points with explosive force, blasting robots into shrapnel. He scanned the battlefield, a feral grin on his face, and then he saw it. A flash of violet light in an alleyway. A 3-pointer, one of the big, tank-like ones, was charging, and Deku, useless, quirkless, pebble-in-the-road Deku, was standing right in its path. Finally, the weakling gets taken out, Bakugo thought with a cruel smirk. But Deku didn't run. He raised a hand, and a shimmering, hexagonal shield of energy materialized. The 3-pointer crashed into it head-on. There was no explosion, just a deep, resonant gong that echoed through the street. The robot, its momentum completely negated, crumpled like a tin can. Bakugo's grin vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. What the hell was that? That was a quirk. A powerful one. A defensive quirk that could stop a 3-pointer cold. His mind reeled. All these years, all the taunts, the sneering, the pity, had Deku been hiding this? Had he been laughing at him this whole time, pretending to be weak? The thought was an inferno of rage in his gut. Deku! He roared, but his voice was lost in the din of the battle. Izuku, meanwhile, was oblivious to his childhood friend's existential crisis. He was in the zone. He disabled robots with surgical precision, used kinetic wards to protect other contestants from falling debris, and redirected attacks, all while keeping his own energy expenditure to a minimum. He was a phantom, a support hero and a striker all in one, flowing through the battlefield like water. And then the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire city block. From behind a skyscraper, the 0-pointer rose to its full, terrifying height. It was a monolith of green and gray metal, a walking skyscraper that made the surrounding buildings look like models. Its single, massive red eye scanned the battlefield, and a deep, grinding roar echoed through the city. The message was clear: run, and everyone did. The stampede of panicked teenagers was instantaneous. The exam was almost over. This thing was an obstacle, not an objective. Izuku turned to run with them, his job done. He had accumulated a respectable 32 villain points through his efficient methods. It might be enough. "Ow!" The small cry cut through the noise of the panic. Izuku's head snapped around. There, sprawled on the ground near the 0-pointer's path, was the kind, round-faced girl he had spoken to before the exam started, the one who had stopped him from tripping. Her leg was pinned under a large chunk of concrete. The 0-pointer took a step. The ground shook. Its colossal foot was rising, preparing to come down right where she was trapped. In that instant, time froze for Izuku. He saw her terrified face. He heard Tashinori's voice in his head, a memory from a different day, asterisk. I'm sure my legs just moved on their own. Asterisk. He saw the falling scrap metal at the beach. He saw a lifetime of being a bystander, of being helpless. No more. His body moved. He wasn't thinking. He was a hero. He broke from the running crowd, sprinting back towards the danger, towards the girl, towards the giant. Ida Tenya saw him, his eyes widening behind his glasses. What is that fool doing? It's suicide. Izuku didn't hear him. He had one objective. He wasn't aiming for the robot's head. He wasn't planning a dramatic punch. He was a shield. He skidded to a halt between the trapped girl and the descending foot of the zero-pointer, planting his feet and digging his sneakers into the cracked asphalt. He thrust both hands towards the sky. Kinetic ward, maximum output! He screamed, pouring every ounce of will and energy he could muster into the core. The shard of momentum flared to life, a supernova of violet in his chest. A massive, translucent dome of shimmering violet energy exploded into existence above him, 100 feet wide. It wasn't just a wall, it was a canopy, a protective cathedral dome of pure force. The zero-pointer's foot, a slab of metal the size of a city bus, came down. Gug! The sound was apocalyptic. It was the ringing of a cosmic bell, a sound so deep and powerful that it shattered every remaining window in a 3-block radius. The shield held. The colossal foot was stopped cold, inches above Izuku's head, but the strain was unimaginable. The shield glowed white-hot, and spiderweb cracks of pure energy spread across its surface. Izuku's body screamed in protest. He felt the force not just in his arms, but in every bone. Blood streamed from his nose. His vision swam with black spots. The muscles in his legs trembled, threatening to give out. He was holding back a mountain. Can't hold it for long, he thought, his teeth gritted so hard he thought they would crack. Asterisk, save her. Not smash. Save, asterisk. He couldn't destroy the robot. Not from this position, and not without unleashing a city-leveling blast. But All Might's words echoed in his mind. A true master redirects the force. He couldn't redirect this much. It would kill him. But maybe, he didn't have to. With his will holding the shield in place, he split his focus, a feat of mental gymnastics that felt like tearing his brain in two. He aimed his intent not up, but down. Destabilize! He roared, his voice raw. He unleashed a torrent of focused, vibrating force pellets directly into the ground beneath the zero-pointer's other foot. It wasn't a powerful blast, but a high-frequency vibration, turning the solid concrete and earth beneath the robot's load-bearing leg into a semi-liquid slurry. The ground gave way. The zero-pointer, its entire weight pressing down on a shield that would not break, and its other foot sinking into unstable ground, lurched violently. Its center of gravity, already compromised, shifted catastrophically. This was his chance. With a final, guttural scream that tore his throat raw, Izuku didn't just hold the shield. He pushed. He poured the last of his reserves into one final act, redirecting a fraction of the robot's own immense downward momentum into a lateral shove. The effect was staggering. The zero-pointer, already off balance, was tipped over the edge. It didn't just fall. It was thrown. The massive machine toppled sideways with the slow, ponderous grace of a dying giant, its arm flailing. It crashed away from the girl, away from Izuku, its body plowing through an empty building in a deafening crescendo of tearing metal and collapsing concrete. The giant was felled. The girl was safe. The kinetic ward shattered into a million motes of violet light that faded like dust in the wind. The power receded, leaving an echoing void. Izuku's strength vanished. His legs buckled. The world turned to black, and he collapsed onto the pavement, his consciousness winking out just as the final buzzer blared across the silent city. In the observation room, a hushed silence had fallen. The pro-heroes stared at the monitor, their mouths agape. Did he just trip the zero-pointer? Midnight whispered in disbelief. His file says energy manipulation. Aizawa grunted, his eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable in them. That's not manipulation. That's absolute dominion. Principal Nizu, however, was not silent. He set his teacup down with a soft click. A wide, unsettlingly intelligent smile spread across his furry face. He had watched the boy disable robots with tactical precision. He had watched him protect other students. And he had just watched him defeat an undefeatable obstacle not with overwhelming power, but with leverage, physics, and a will of iron. He hadn't just smashed the problem. He had solved it. Well now, the principal chirped, his black eyes glinting. This year just got infinitely more interesting. ####Chapter 3. The Echoes of a Second Shard. The world swam back into focus with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the gentle, insistent beeping of a heart monitor. Izuku groaned, a profound ache radiating from every muscle in his body. It was a familiar feeling, the deep, resonant exhaustion that followed a major expenditure of the core's power, but this time it was laced with the phantom pain of near-total collapse. He was in a pristine white room, the UA infirmary. Sunlight streamed through a large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A tiny, elderly woman in a doctor's coat, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, looked up from a chart. It was the youthful heroine, Recovery Girl. "Ah, you're awake," she said, her voice gentle but with an undercurrent of professional sternness. She shuffled over and peered at him, her large glasses magnifying her eyes. "You gave us all quite the scare, young man. Total system exhaustion, severe muscle tearing in your legs and back, and a level of quirk backlash I haven't seen since a certain other reckless powerhouse was a first year." She gave a pointed look toward the door, a look Izuku understood implicitly. He shifted, wincing as his muscles protested. "I'm sorry for the trouble. Trouble is my business," she said, tapping her chart. "What I'm not in the business of is mysteries. Your quirk, energy manipulation, is unlike anything I've ever seen. I healed the physical damage, the torn ligaments and strained muscles. But there's a deeper fatigue here, a cellular exhaustion that my quirk barely touched. It's as if you didn't just use your energy, you burned the very fuel your cells run on." She leaned closer, her expression serious. "Whatever you're doing, it's taking a toll on a fundamental level. Be careful. A body can only be rebuilt so many times before the original design is lost." Her words were a stark reminder of the core's alien nature. It wasn't a biological enhancement. It was a foreign engine bolted to his soul, and his body was the chassis taking all the strain. He placed a hand over his chest. The core was quiet, its light dormant, but he could feel its presence, a subtle weight, a faint hum at the edge of his hearing. The door slid open, and his mother rushed in, her face a mess of tears and relief. "Izuku! Oh, my baby!" She enveloped him in a hug that was both desperate and gentle, careful of his unseen injuries. "They told me what you did, that you stopped that giant robot, that you saved that girl. Oh, I was so proud, and so terrified." She pulled back, her hands framing his face, her eyes scanning him for any sign of damage. "This quirk, it's so powerful. But it hurts you so much. It's just like..." She trailed off, her joy warring with a deep, primal fear. For 10 years she had worried about her son being hurt because he was fragile. Now she had to worry about him being hurt because he was powerful. It was a new, and in some ways, more terrifying, reality. "I'm okay, Mom," Izuku said, his voice stronger than he expected. He squeezed her hand. "I'm learning. I promise I'll be more careful." He was no longer just offering empty platitudes. He had a path. He had a mentor. He had a purpose. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a quiet, steely resolve. A letter had arrived while he was recovering. A sleek, holographic card confirming his acceptance into UA's hero course. He'd done it. He had scored 32 villain points, a respectable, if not spectacular, number. But the screen had also shown another score, 60 rescue points. The highest score in the exam's history. He had saved the girl, protected others from debris, and taken down the zero-pointer without causing any further danger to the examinees. He had followed All Might's lesson, save, don't smash, and UA had recognized it. He was going to be a hero. The first day of class at UA High was a dizzying, surreal experience. Finding Class 1A was an ordeal in itself, its door comically oversized. Taking a deep breath, Izuku slid it open and was met with a scene of controlled chaos. His eyes immediately landed on two familiar figures. The stern-faced boy with engines in his legs was arguing with a spiky-haired blonde who had his feet propped up on his desk. Ida Tenya and Kaken. Of course, he got in, Izuku thought with a familiar mix of awe and dread. Asterisk, he's amazing. His score must have been off the charts. Asterisk. Before he could process the reunion, Ida noticed him at the door. He marched over, his movements stiff and precise. "It's you!" he declared, his hand chopping the air. "I must commend you. While I completely misjudged the true nature of the exam, you grasped it perfectly. You realized the importance of rescuing others over simply accumulating points. You were the superior candidate." Izuku blinked, taken aback. I didn't really think of it like that, I just... Midoriya, right?" A cheerful voice cut in. The kind girl from the exam, her brown hair cut into a neat bob, bounced over to them. "I'm Ochiko Uraraka. I wanted to thank you. You saved me back there. That thing you did with the shield and making the big robot trip? That was incredible. It was like whoosh. And then gong. And then BM. She made excited gestures with her hands, her face beaming. Izuku's face erupted in a blush. "And no, it was nothing, really. I'm just glad you're okay. And you stopped me from falling earlier, so thank you for that." This friendly, normal interaction was suddenly shattered by a low, guttural growl. Deku. The name was a whip crack in the noisy classroom. The temperature seemed to drop. Izuku turned slowly to see Katsuki Bakugo standing there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his red eyes burning with an intensity that went far beyond their usual animosity. This wasn't the anger of a bully asserting dominance. This was the cold, focused fury of betrayal. "So," Bakugo said, his voice dangerously low. "All this time. All those years." He took a step closer, his fists clenching at his sides, tiny sparks crackling from his palms. "Every time I knocked you down, every time you were crying in the dirt, every time I told you that you were a worthless, quirkless nobody, you had that." He jabbed a finger toward Izuku. "You had a power like that, and you just hid it." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "Kaken, no, it's not like that," Izuku stammered, taking a step back. "It's complicated, I only just... Complicated?" Bakugo sneered, his voice rising to a roar. "The only thing complicated here is how you managed to keep a straight face for 10 damn years. You were looking down on me. On everyone, letting us think you were just some pathetic pebble while secretly you were holding a quirk that could stop the zero-pointer. Were you having a good laugh? Huh? Was it funny, Deku? If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave." The new voice was tired, monotone, and utterly devoid of energy, yet it cut through Bakugo's rage like a razor. Everyone turned to the doorway. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade was lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, resembling a haggard caterpillar. He took a long sip from a juice pouch before unzipping himself and standing up. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work," he said, his tired eyes scanning the room. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." He looked from a seething Bakugo to a terrified Izuku, and his gaze lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second too long. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a deep, penetrating suspicion. "Get into your P uniforms and meet me on the training grounds. Now." The quirk apprehension test was, as Aizawa explained with deadpan relish, a way to gauge their potential. And, he added with a chilling lack of emotion, whoever came in last would be judged to have no potential and would be expelled immediately. A wave of panic swept through the class. Izuku felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He had power, yes, but it was volatile and physically taxing. He wasn't a natural athlete like the others. If he couldn't use his quirk effectively in these specific tests, he could very well end up last. The 50-meter dash came first. Ida, with his engines, was a blur. Ajuitsu used her frog-like legs to bound across in a few leaps. Bakugo propelled himself with explosions. When it was Izuku's turn, he stood at the starting line, his mind racing. A continuous push would be too draining. He needed something efficient. Precision, not power. As the starting pistol fired, he didn't move. Instead, he crouched low and slapped his palm against the ground behind him, releasing a single, sharp pulse of kinetic energy. The force pellet principle, but magnified. The resulting shove was like being kicked by a giant. He was launched forward, his body parallel to the ground for the first 20 meters, an uncontrolled human bullet. He landed awkwardly, stumbling, but his momentum carried him across the finish line in 4.13 seconds. It was a good score, but the landing had been clumsy, earning him a critical glare from Aizawa. He struggled through the next few tests. His grip strength was pitifully below average. The core didn't enhance his base muscularity. He managed a decent score in the long jump by using another kinetic push, but it was clear he lacked the fine-tuned bodily control of his peers. He was hovering near the bottom of the rankings. It was all going to come down to the ball throw. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Midoriya, you're up. Izuku walked into the circle, the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He could feel Bakugo's burning glare, Uraraka's hopeful gaze, Ida's analytical stare. He held the ball, its weight familiar in his palm. He had to do something impressive. He couldn't just throw it. He had to show his potential. He remembered All Might's throw from the first day of their training, how he'd used a full power smash. Izuku couldn't do that. His arm was still tender from the entrance exam, a deep, phantom ache that reminded him of his limits. A single, explosive burst of power was too risky, too damaging. Asterisk control, not chaos. Redirect. Don't just create. Asterisk. An idea sparked. It was a theory he and Toshinori had discussed but never tested. Combining absorption and redirection in a single, fluid motion, he began his wind-up, mimicking a professional pitcher's motion. He drew his arm back, building potential energy in his muscles and tendons. But as he did, he focused inward on the core. He wasn't just preparing to throw, he was preparing to channel. And then he felt it. It started as a faint whisper, a dissonant note in the familiar hum of the momentum shard. It was a pull, a strange, ethereal resonance coming from the direction of UA's main building. It felt hollow, a question mark in the fabric of reality. For a split second, his focus wavered, his mind drawn to this new, inexplicable sensation. Aizawa's voice cut through his distraction. We don't have all day, Midoriya, right? The test. He pushed the strange feeling aside and unleashed his power. As his arms swung forward, he didn't just let go of the ball. He activated the core, but in a new way. He created a small kinetic ward behind the ball, pushing it forward, while simultaneously creating a low-pressure kinetic field in front of it, pulling it along. It was a push-pull effect, a controlled, continuous application of force that wrapped around the ball like a second skin. The result was spectacular. The ball left his hand with a flash of violet light and a sharp crack as it broke the sound barrier. It didn't arc. It flew in a dead straight line, a miniature comet trailing ethereal purple energy, getting smaller and smaller until it was just a speck, and then it was gone. The class was silent, stunned. Aizawa stared at the device in his hand, his mouth slightly agape. He turned it around. The screen displayed a single, sideways number 8. An infinity symbol. A murmur rippled through the students. Infinity? Seriously? Bakugo's face was a mask of incandescent fury. Asterisk infinity? He got infinity? That's a score for a god, asterisk. Izuku stood in the circle, panting, his arm throbbing with a familiar, searing pain. He'd pushed it a little too hard, distracted by that strange hum. And the hum was still there. Stronger now. It wasn't a sound in his ears, but a feeling in the core itself. It was a song with a missing verse, a magnet pulling on a piece of iron in his soul. It was an ache. An echo. Aizawa recovered, his face returning to its usual impassive mask, but his eyes held a new, sharper level of scrutiny. Not bad, he grunted, the closest thing to a compliment he had given all day. The rest of the day passed in a haze for Izuku. He sat through his regular classes, English with Present Mike, Modern Hero Art History with Midnight, but he couldn't focus. The hum was a constant distraction, a persistent pull from deep within the school. It was a craving he didn't understand. After the final bell, Uraraka and Ida caught up to him. Midoriya, your performance was astounding, Ida declared. That final throw defied all known principles of physics. It was so cool, Uraraka added. Are you free? We were going to go check out the station area. Izuku wanted to go. He wanted to make friends, to be a normal student. But the pull was too strong. It was a physical ache in his chest, right where the core was seated. I'm sorry, he said, his voice strained. There's something I have to check out. Maybe tomorrow? He left them with a hurried apology, his feet moving on their own, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain. He walked through the bustling, modern corridors of UA, but the pull led him away from the student areas, toward an older, quieter wing of the vast campus. The architecture changed, the sleek metal and glass giving way to stone and dark wood. The air grew cooler, filled with the scent of old paper and dust. The hum grew louder in his mind, a clear, ringing chime that vibrated in time with his own heartbeat. It led him down a deserted hallway to a single, imposing door made of heavy, dark oak, reinforced with steel. A polished brass plate was affixed to it. U.A. Deep archive level Omega clearance required. This was it. The source of the hum was behind this door. He reached out a hand, but before he could touch it, a cheerful, high-pitched voice spoke from behind him. Lost, Mr. Midoriya? Izuku yelped and spun around. Standing there, a steaming teacup held delicately in one paw, was a small, white, furry creature in a sharp suit. It was a mouse? A dog? A bear? He was the principal of UA, the hyper-intelligent hero, Nizu. And Mr. Principal, Izuku stammered, bowing frantically. I'm so sorry! I wasn't trying to snoop, I felt something. Nizu's black, beady eyes glinted with an unnerving level of intelligence. He took a slow sip of his tea. Felt something? How fascinating. Most students feel nothing but boredom in this wing. Pray tell, what did you feel? Izuku hesitated. How could he explain this? It's a hum. A pull. It's coming from in there, he said, gesturing to the archive door. It feels like a part of my quirk is in there. He braced himself for disbelief, for a lecture on staying out of restricted areas. Instead, Nizu's smile widened. Is that so? A quirk with a tangible, external component? Utterly fascinating, the very definition of a puzzle. He hopped down from wherever he had been perched, and trotted to the door. This archive contains artifacts from before the dawn of quirks, items of inexplicable energy, and a great many historical documents. For one of them to be resonating with a student is an unprecedented event. He produced a keycard and swiped it through a hidden panel. With a hiss of pneumatics and the heavy clunk of deadbolts, the massive door swung inward. Well, we can't have a puzzle go unsolved, can we? Nizu said, gesturing for Izuku to enter. After you, Mr. Midoriya. Let's see if we can't find this missing piece of you. Stepping into the archive was like stepping into another world. It was a vast, circular chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, filled not just with books, but with strange, glowing crystals, pieces of defunct, otherworldly technology, and artifacts sealed in containment jars. The air was cold and still. And the hum, in here, it was a deafening roar in Izuku's mind, a clear, undeniable beacon. He walked past the floating orb that pulsed with faint red light, past the suit of ancient armor that seemed to absorb the light around it. The pull was overwhelming now, guiding him to a dusty, forgotten corner of the archive. There, on a simple wooden lectern, sat a single book. It was ancient, bound in cracked, dark brown leather, with no title or markings on its cover. Ah, that one, Nizu said, having followed him silently. One of our oldest acquisitions. It predates the age of quirks by several millennia, recovered from a dig site on the Anatolian plateau. The text is written in a language that has defied every analysis, every codebreaker, every linguist we've thrown at it. It is, for all intents and purposes, a complete unknown. Izuku reached out, his hand trembling. The hum was coming directly from the book. With Nizu's silent nod of encouragement, he placed his hands on the cover and opened it. The pages were filled with elegant, flowing script that was utterly alien. But in the center of the book, a section had been hollowed out, And nestled within that hollow, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, crystalline object. It was the size of his thumb, shaped like a teardrop, and was a deep, brilliant sapphire blue. It seemed to drink in the ambient light of the archive, glowing from within with a soft, azure luminescence. It pulsed with a quiet, contemplative energy, the source of the hum that had been calling to him all day. It was another shard. He knew, with the same primal certainty he'd felt at the beach, that this belonged with him. It was the missing verse to his song. Without a word, he looked at Nizu, who simply watched, his expression one of intense, scientific curiosity. Then, Izuka lifted the hem of his PE uniform, revealing the pale, latticed pattern of the infinity core, barely visible beneath the skin of his sternum. There was the first, now empty socket where the violet shard had been, and beside it, a second, waiting indentation. He picked up the blue shard. It felt cool to the touch, and as he held it, a whisper of a thought, not his own, brushed against his mind. To know. He took a shaky breath and pressed the teardrop-shaped crystal against the second socket on his chest. It clicked into place. The world did not explode with force. It imploded with sensation. There was no violet blast, no kinetic recoil. Instead, a wave of pure, cool blue light washed through his mind. The physical world fell away, replaced by a universe of thought and feeling. The first consciousness he felt was Nizu's. It wasn't just the principal's surface thoughts. It was the entire architecture of his mind. A staggering, hyper-fast whirlwind of probability matrices, strategic analyses, and a deep, almost joyful curiosity, all layered over a pang of ancient loneliness from being a one-of-a-kind creation. It was dizzying, like trying to read 1,000 books at once. Then, a second consciousness slammed into him. The archive door slid open, and Aizawa stood there, his scarf-like capture weapon beginning to float around him. Nizu, what is going on in here? I felt his thoughts hit Izuka like a physical blow. Exhaustion. Deep, chronic pain from old injuries. A profound, bone-deep weariness with the world. But beneath it, a fierce, burning protectiveness for his students. For all of them. And aimed directly at Izuku, a spike of alarm, deep suspicion, and a sliver of professional fear. This kid isn't just powerful. He's wrong, and then the floodgates broke. It was no longer just Nizu and Aizawa. With the shard of perception now active, the walls of the archive were no longer a barrier. The minds of everyone in the school crashed into him. He felt Uraraka's admiration, a warm, bubbly feeling mixed with a genuine worry for his well-being. He felt Ida's rigid sense of duty, a structured mind of rules and schedules, laced with a current of anxiety about his older brother, Ingenium. And then he felt Bakugo. It was a psychic bonfire. A howling inferno of rage, jealousy, and wounded pride so potent it felt like a physical scream. But beneath the inferno, raw and exposed, was a deep, terrified insecurity. A fear that his entire life, his entire goal of being number one, was built on the false premise of being the strongest. A fear that the person he had always seen as a worthless obstacle was now an insurmountable mountain. The sheer, violent contradiction of Bakugo's emotions was a feedback loop of pure agony. It was too much. The joy, the anger, the worry, the ambition, the exhaustion, the pain of hundreds of students and faculty, a cacophony of consciousness, a tidal wave of souls crashing down upon him. He couldn't separate them. He couldn't block them out. He was a radio receiver tuned to every station at once, at maximum volume. His own thoughts were drowned out. His sense of self began to fray at the edges. Izuka Midoriya threw his head back, a scream of pure sensory overload tearing from his throat, a sound of a mind being ripped apart. He clutched his temples, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror, and collapsed to the floor of the ancient archive, lost in the storm of 1,000 minds. Of course. Here is a lengthy, detailed 7,000-word rendition of Chapter 4, The Weight of Understanding, based on the provided outline. Chapter 4, The Weight of Understanding. The world became a symphony of screams. Not audible screams, but the silent, psychic shrieks of 1,000 consciousnesses crashing into one another. Izuku's mind was the epicenter of the collision. He was a telephone operator's switchboard from hell, every line plugged directly into his brain, every conversation happening at once. Failed that pop quiz, my parents are going to kill me. That new hero, Kamui Woods, his branch technique is so versatile. Rage, fury, I'll kill him. Deku, how dare he? Deep, bone-deep exhaustion, need more coffee, these kids will be the death of me. Admiration, warmth, I hope he's okay, he seems so stressed. Probability of villain attack on campus in next 72 hours. 2.37%, acceptable risk. The thoughts were a tidal wave of undiluted human experience, and he was drowning in it. It was a cacophony of ambition, anxiety, boredom, anger, love, and 1,000 other shades of feeling, all bombarding him without filter or reprieve. His own identity was a flickering candle in a hurricane, threatening to be extinguished by the sheer volume of other people. He felt a hand on his shoulder, firm and grounding. Aizawa. The physical contact was a lightning rod. The teacher's thoughts, a maelstrom of alarm and professional duty, became the dominant signal. Asterisk, what is this? A psychic backlash quirk? Unstable. Dangerous. Need to contain the situation. Protect the student. Neutralize the threat. Asterisk. Aizawa's eyes flared red, his capture weapon whipping around his neck. His quirk, erasure, washed over Izuku, and did absolutely nothing. The torrent of thoughts didn't even flicker. Aizawa's quirk worked by shutting down the expression of a person's quirk factor. But the core wasn't a quirk. The shards were not biological. They were fundamental aspects of reality itself, woven into Izuku's being. Trying to erase their power was like trying to erase gravity by staring at it. Aizawa's own shock was a sharp spike in the psychic noise. Asterisk, it's not working. My quirk isn't working on him. What is he? Asterisk. Mr. Midoriya! Nizu's voice cut through the chaos, high-pitched and sharp. The principal's consciousness was a fortress of order in the storm, a beacon of pure, cold logic. Asterisk, subject is experiencing catastrophic sensory overload. The new artifact has integrated. Cause, uncontrolled data influx from a metaphysical source. Solution, force a system reboot. Interrupt the connection. Asterisk. Before Aizawa could react, Nizu scurried forward and delivered a surprisingly sharp rap to the side of Izuku's head with his ceramic teacup. It wasn't hard enough to cause injury, but the sudden, sharp physical shock, combined with Nizu's focused intent, was enough to momentarily disrupt the maelstrom. For a split second, the noise cut out. Silence. Blessed, beautiful silence. In that moment of clarity, Izuku's survival instinct kicked in. He didn't know how to turn the new shard off, but he knew he had to get away from the source of the noise. He had to find a place with fewer people. He had to be alone. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with a feral panic, and bolted. Midoriya! Aizawa shouted, his capture weapon shooting out. But Izuku was already gone. He didn't run in a straight line. He let the ebb and flow of the psychic noise guide him, instinctively weaving through the corridors of UA, choosing paths with the fewest minds. He was a fish swimming upstream against the current of consciousness. He ran past classrooms full of roaring thoughts, down empty maintenance hallways where the only minds were the distant hum of janitorial staff, and burst out of a side exit into the cool evening air. He didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the campus, collapsing behind a hedge, gasping for air. The noise was quieter here, a dull roar instead of a deafening scream. It was still there, the distant thoughts of the city beyond the walls, but it was manageable. A headache instead of a brain hemorrhage. He sat there, his back against the rough brick of the perimeter wall, his head in his hands trembling. The shard of perception. The power to understand. He had thought it would be like his analytical mind, but amplified. He had imagined seeing tactical weaknesses, understanding villains' plans. He hadn't imagined this. He hadn't imagined feeling a third year's heartbreak over a failed relationship, a teacher's chronic back pain, Bakugo's soul-tearing rage and fear. It wasn't just data. It was raw, unfiltered empathy, and it was torture. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. Izuku learned to function, but it was like learning to walk on a ship in a hurricane. He built walls in his mind, thin and flimsy at first, but slowly strengthening. He learned to focus on the physical world, the texture of his desk, the taste of his food, the precise movements of his own body. to ground himself and push the psychic noise to the background. It made him seem distant, jumpy. Uraraka would ask him a question, and he would flinch, not at her words, but at the sudden wave of her earnest curiosity and friendship that came with them. Ida would lecture him about classroom etiquette, and Izuku would have to brace himself against the boy's overwhelming sense of rigid, anxious duty. And Bakugo. Bakugo was a minefield. Every time their eyes met, Izuku was hit with a blast of pure, vitriolic hatred layered over a chasm of insecurity. It was so intense it made him physically nauseous. He started taking longer routes to class just to avoid him. To Bakugo, it looked like Deku was scared of him again, just like the old days. To Izuku, it was an act of self-preservation. The only person he could truly be around was All Might. When they met for their secret training sessions on the now spotless Dagoba beach, Toshinori's mind was a comfort. It was a complex tapestry of physical pain, deep-seated regret, and a profound, unwavering belief in him. It was a lighthouse in the storm. You cannot fight it, young Midoriya, Toshinori advised, his gaunt form huddled in a coat against the sea breeze. This shard of momentum responds to your will to move things. This shard of perception responds to your will to understand. You have always been an empathetic person, always trying to get inside the heads of heroes and villains. This power is simply an extension of that. But it hurts, Izuku whispered, staring out at the waves. I feel everything. When we spar, I feel your pain. The ache in your side. When I see people on the news, I feel their fear. Then do not fight it, Toshinori said softly. Listen to it. Guide it. A hero must understand pain to know how to heal it. This power gives you a terrible burden, but also a profound gift, the gift of true understanding. The training changed. It was no longer just about physical conditioning and power control. It became about mental fortitude. Toshinori would have him sit and meditate, learning to identify individual thoughts in the psychic din of the city, to trace them to their source, and then to let them go. He was learning to be a sentinel, not a sponge. In combat training at UA, the new shard made him seem untouchable. During a 2-on-2 exercise he was paired with Uraraka against Ida and Bakugo. The moment the match began, Bakugo was a blur of explosive motion, rocketing toward him. I've been waiting for this, Deku! He roared. The old Izuku would have been paralyzed. The new Izuku stood his ground. He wasn't just watching Bakugo's movements, he was feeling his intent. He felt the spike of rage that preceded the launch, the surge of kinetic intent aimed at his face. He felt the precise moment Bakugo was going to pivot for a right hook. Without even thinking, Izuku took a small step to the left. Bakugo's explosive punch, aimed with murderous precision, flew past his ear, close enough for him to feel the heat. Bakugo's shock was a tangible wave of psychic energy. He dodged? He didn't even flinch. He just moved. Uraraka, now! Izuku shouted, his voice calm and clear. While Bakugo was overextended, Uraraka, following the plan they'd hastily concocted, slapped her hand on his back, activating her zero-gravity quirk. The explosive boy was suddenly weightless, his furious trajectory sending him floating helplessly toward the ceiling. Recipro burst. Ida came charging in, a blur of silver and blue, aiming a powerful kick at Izuku. Again, Izuku felt it coming. He felt the mechanical precision of Ida's mind, the calculated trajectory. He didn't erect a huge kinetic ward. Instead, he raised his palm and created a small, focused one, no bigger than his hand, angled at 45 degrees. Ida's foot connected with the shield. Instead of being stopped, his momentum was instantly redirected downwards. He slammed foot first into the ground, embedding himself in the concrete up to his knee. The match was over in less than 30 seconds. Izuku and Uraraka were declared the winners. They hadn't thrown a single punch, but Izuku felt no victory. As he walked past Bakugo, now being lowered by Uraraka, he was hit by the boy's psychic scream. It was no longer just rage. It was humiliation, confusion, and a sliver of something that felt terrifyingly like despair. The feeling was so raw, so painful, that Izuku had to clutch his chest, gasping for breath. The weight of understanding was a crushing one. The trip to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was supposed to be a reprieve. A fun field trip with All Might, Aizawa, and the space hero, 13. The bus ride was filled with the excited chatter of his classmates. Izuku sat by the window, doing his best to filter out the noise, focusing on the passing scenery. Your quirk is a lot like All Might's, isn't it, Midoriya? Kirishima said from the seat across from him. The casual comment sent a ripple of varied reactions through the bus. Izuku felt Uraraka's curiosity, Bakugo's simmering resentment, and Todoroki's cool, analytical indifference. Izuku started, but Azuri Tsuyu cut him off with her usual bluntness. Wait, no, it's not. All Might doesn't hurt himself when he uses his quirk. Not like Midoriya did at the entrance exam and the fitness test. Ribbit. The conversation continued, but Izuku tuned it out. The shard of perception was humming with a low-grade anxiety, a composite of all the students' excitement and nervousness. But as they drove further from the main campus, a new feeling began to creep in at the edges of his perception. It was cold. Empty. A void where feeling should be. It was a dissonance in the symphony of the world, a string on the universal violin that was playing a silent, chilling note. He subconsciously placed a hand over his chest, a feeling of deep unease settling over him. They arrived at the massive domed facility, greeted by 13. The hero's thoughts were a strange mix of clinical professionalism and a bubbly, genuine passion for rescue work. As 13 began their speech about the dangers of quirks and the importance of using them to save people, the cold feeling intensified. And then the lights went out. The central fountain flickered and died. A dark, swirling vortex, like a wound in the fabric of space, opened in the plaza below them. Aizawa spun around, his eyes wide. 13. Protect the students. That's a real portal. Villains. From the swirling purple mist, figures began to emerge. Dozens, then hundreds of them. Low-level thugs, mutated miscreants, a motley army of societal dregs. But Izuku's attention wasn't on them. His perception shard was screaming, focused on 3 distinct signals emerging from the portal. The first was the portal itself. The being made of purple mist, Kurogiri. His mind was a strange, placid loyalty, a calm center in the storm. He was a follower, but a powerful, focused one. The second was the man covered in disembodied hands, Tamura Shigaraki. His consciousness was a screeching, dissonant chord of childish rage, petulant frustration, and an itching, scratching need for destruction. It was the mind of a spoiled, sociopathic child given a box of matches in a world made of gasoline. He was itching to kill, to break things, to make the world pay for some unseen, unfelt slight. But it was the third signal that made Izuku's blood run cold. It was the hulking, beaked creature that stepped out beside Shigaraki. The Noma. His perception shard reached for it, searching for a mind, for intent, for emotion, and found nothing. It was a black hole. A psychic void. There was no fear, no anger, no thought. There was only a blank, terrifying slate, a puppet waiting for its strings to be pulled. It was the cold, empty feeling he had sensed on the bus, magnified 1,000 times. It was the most unnatural thing he had ever felt. So many, Kirishima said, his hands hardening into red, rocky fists. They must have known the schedule. They came here to kill All Might. The villains swarmed forward. Aizawa, without a moment's hesitation, leaped down the massive staircase to engage them alone. The rest of you, get out of here. But Kurogiri was already there, his misty form expanding to block their escape. I'm afraid I can't allow that. We are the League of Villains. And we are here to kill the symbol of peace. In the ensuing chaos, Kurogiri's warp gate scattered the students across the different zones of the USJ. Izuku found himself plunging into the shipwreck zone, landing in the water with a splash alongside Azuri and Mineta. The psychic noise was suddenly segmented. He could feel the panicked, terrified thoughts of Mineta, the calm, pragmatic mind of Azuri, and from the water around them, the simple, predatory hunger of the aquatic villains closing in. We need a plan, Tsuyu said, her calm voice a stark contrast to Mineta's terrified wailing. Izuku's mind was already working. He didn't need to see the villains. He could feel them. He could sense their positions, their numbers, the direction of their approach. There are 12 of them, he said, his voice steady. Most are below us. 3 are circling on the surface. They think we're trapped. He looked at the ship in the center of the lake. We need to get to the ship. But they won't let us swim there. He looked at his companions. Mineta's quirk produced sticky purple balls. Azri was a frog. He had control over momentum. Then he looked at the water. Kinetic energy. The water wasn't still. It was a medium. An idea, born from his training with All Might, sparked in his mind. I have a plan, he said, a new, unfamiliar confidence in his voice. But it's going to take everything we've got. He took a deep breath and plunged a hand into the water. He didn't try to push the villains. He focused on the water itself. He pictured a whirlpool, a vortex. He unleashed the shard of momentum, not as a blast, but as a sustained, rotational force. The water began to churn. A small vortex formed around his hand, then grew with terrifying speed. Within seconds, a massive whirlpool had formed in the center of the lake, a churning maw of water and foam. The villains in the water, caught completely by surprise, were sucked into the vortex, their simple minds flooding Izuku's senses with panic and confusion as they were slammed together in the center. Now! Izuku roared over the sound of the churning water. Mineta, crying, began pulling the purple balls from his head and throwing them into the center of the whirlpool, where the villains were helplessly clustered. Azri used her long tongue to help him aim, grabbing the balls and flinging them with pinpoint accuracy. The villains were stuck together in a giant, struggling, inescapable ball. The effort was immense. Izuku's arm felt like it was on fire, and his head throbbed from the psychic feedback of a dozen panicked minds. But it had worked. They made their way to the shore just as All Might arrived, not with his signature smile, but with a face of thunderous rage. He tore through the remaining low-level villains with brutal efficiency. But Izuku's attention, and his perception shard, was locked on the central plaza. He felt Aizawa's thoughts, once a sharp fortress of control, now strained and fading, filled with agony and a desperate will to survive. He was fighting the Nomu. He can't win, Izuku realized with a sickening certainty. It's not a fight. It's an execution. He ran. He didn't wait for All Might. He ran toward the center of the USJ, toward the epicenter of that terrible, psychic void. He arrived at the edge of the plaza just in time to see the Nomu grab Aizawa's head and slam it into the concrete. The sound was a sickening crunch. Aizawa's consciousness, his mentor's mind, flickered like a dying light, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of pure, white-hot pain. Something inside Izuku snapped. The careful walls he had built in his mind, the patient filtering he had practiced, it all came crashing down. He opened the floodgates of the perception shard, not to listen, but to search. He pushed his senses into the Nomu, into that terrifying psychic abyss, looking for a weakness, a seam, a single flicker of something, and for a fraction of a second, he found it. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't an emotion. It was a command. A single, indelible line of psychic code buried deep within the void, the fundamental operating instruction for the puppet. It was a whisper of another mind, a mind of immense power and ancient evil. The mind of All for One. Kill the noisy one. Protect Tamura. Obey. And within that code, he saw the Noma's design. He felt its quirks, shock absorption and super regeneration. A living shield designed to counter All Might. You couldn't beat it with brute force. It would just absorb the kinetic energy and regenerate the damage. But as the Nomu raised its fist to deliver the final, killing blow to Aizawa, Izuku saw the flicker again. The briefest of microsecond delays as the shock absorption quirk prepared to receive the kinetic feedback of its own punch. A tiny, infinitesimal window. He had no time for a plan. There was only instinct. He activated the shard of momentum, but he didn't aim for the Noma's body. He aimed for a single point in space, just in front of its exposed brain. He didn't create a blast. He created a needle. He poured all his will into creating a hyper-focused, hyperdense, vibrating spear of pure kinetic energy, no thicker than his finger. A force lance. As the Noma's arm descended, Izuku fired. The violet lance of energy shot through the air, silent and invisible. It struck the Noma's skull in that perfect, microsecond window. The shock absorption quirk wasn't ready. The super regeneration couldn't react to something it hadn't perceived as damage yet.